Dear listeners of Heart and Soul Gospel Ministry, this is Joseph, the host of Wake Up Call. Last week, we considered the story of the blind man in John 9. We reflected on how a sinner can receive a new life through Jesus Christ and what kind of life he is called to live in this world. Jesus specifically told the blind man to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which was the lowest point in the city. That signifies that one must go to a place of humility to truly encounter Jesus, be cleansed, and have their spiritual eyes opened. In other words, receiving a new life is about lowering oneself in humility. Then, what exactly is humility? Many people have pondered what the Bible might say about humility. Today, we will reflect on the biblical perspective on humility. Actually, the concept of humility is not confined just to the Bible. It also exists in the world. People generally prefer humble individuals and dislike those who are arrogant or boastful. Then, how is humility expressed in different cultures? In American culture, humility is often seen as the absence of arrogance. In Korean and Japanese cultures, it is more about intentionally lowering oneself. Suppose someone praises a great cook by saying, "This food is amazing, you're an excellent cook." What would be a humble response from this cook? We might think the humble cook might say, "Oh no, I'm not that good, you're too kind. Thank you for enjoying it." Similarly, when someone excels academically, plays an instrument well, or even attains great financial success through hard work, we often expect them and respond to compliments by humbly waving their hands and saying, "Oh no, I'm not that great. You're just being generous with your words. Thank you." What about you? Do you also respond in this way when someone praises you? I too often reply like this. I might even lower my head shyly. But what if, while we respond with such seeming humility outwardly, we inwardly think, "Of course I'm good at cooking. I am smart. I play the instrument well. I have great business skills." If so, can we really say we have humility? Truthfully, we would simply be pretending to be humble. Basically, we believe we deserve praise but choose to deny it outwardly. So, what does biblical humility look like? In fact, biblical humility is different from worldly humility. The Bible does not emphasize outwardly denying praises or appealing to others as a humble person. If we think of humility, we must first look at Jesus. Jesus said in Matthew 11:29, "I am gentle and humble in heart. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me." He says he is humble. That humbleness is in his heart. As evidence, when Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey, Matthew highlighted his humility by quoting Zechariah 9:9. Let's reflect further on Jesus. When people called him the King of the Jews, the Christ, the Messiah, or Lord, how did Jesus respond? Did he wave his hand and say, "Oh no, what are you talking about? I'm not the Messiah. You're being too kind"? No, he did not give any of those outwardly humble responses. Instead, he agreed with what they were saying to him. For example, he affirmed his identity as the Messiah. In the story of the man born blind that we discussed last week, when the man's eyes were opened and he expressed his desire to believe in the Son of Man, Jesus responded, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." The woman at the well in Samaria said, "I know that the Messiah, called Christ, is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." To this, Jesus replied, "I, the one speaking to you, am he." On the one hand, we know Jesus is humble in heart, and he is the epitome of humility. On the other, when we look at him, we realize that his humility is different from what we often perceive as humility. In Greek, there are two words translated as humility. One is praus, and the other is tapenos. Praus refers to a gentle heart and can also be translated as meekness or gentleness. Tapenos conveys the idea of being oppressed, lowly, humble, or feeling humiliated. When Jesus entered Jerusalem on a donkey in Matthew 21:5, the word praus was used to describe his humility. The King of Kings and the Son of God did not enter his city, Jerusalem, on a majestic white horse, but rather on a humble colt. This reflected the gentleness of his heart, demonstrating his obedience to God and his will. In Matthew 11:29, when Jesus said, "I am gentle and humble in heart, take my yoke upon you and learn from me," the word tapenos was used. Jesus, who is God, came to bear a yoke. The Almighty God was captured, dragged around, slapped, spat upon, and unjustly condemned by mere human beings despite being sinless. He was whipped, mocked, and ultimately crucified. He came to be in a state of being crushed, humiliated, and brought low. This, too, was God's will, and Jesus obeyed it. Humility described in the Bible is vastly different from how we often perceive humility. True humility is not simply saying, "No, I am not worthy of such praise." Rather, it is about accepting situations where we may not be treated fairly or may even be humiliated, trusting that these circumstances are permitted by God and receiving them with submission. It is easy to feign humility when receiving praise because deep down it still makes us feel good. If we are honest, we might even find pride hidden beneath our supposed humility. However, true humility is tested when we are ignored, mistreated, or denied the recognition we deserve. That is the kind of humility the Bible speaks of. Dear listeners of Heart and Soul Gospel Ministry, I encourage you to examine whether your humility aligns with Christ's humility or if it is merely a superficial humility shaped by the world. James 4:6 tells us that God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. To be truly humble in God's eyes is to trust Him even in difficult circumstances and accept what He allows. James emphasizes this in James 4:6 because some believers were trying to live by their own strength, pursuing worldly desires instead of depending on God. This message is directed toward those who cannot accept being placed in lowly or dishonorable positions by God, and instead seek to elevate themselves through whatever means possible. Jesus, despite having no reason to endure such humiliation, remained silent and accepted it with humility. The truth is, we are all sinners, undeserving of any honor. Even being called God's children is an unearned privilege. When we realize this, we no longer need to try to appear humble. It becomes natural because we recognize that we are unworthy in the first place. May we all seek to embody true, biblical humility rather than the worldly imitation of it. May you learn from Jesus, emulate His humility, and follow His example. I will see you again next week at this time. Goodbye.